She thought mocking the man in torn clothes would be the highlight of her night, until the room went silent. Senator Blackwood had gone paper pale, recognizing the political disaster unfolding. His dinner companion had just publicly destroyed a man whose story would be front-page news by morning. "Mrs. Ashworth," David's voice cut through her panic like a blade. "You mentioned calling police. Please, don't let me stop you. I'm sure they'd be interested in how you publicly humiliated a man whose only crime was trying to find his way back to the world he helped build." Victoria's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, her arsenal of words completely depleted. Her wealth, connections, social position meant nothing. Worse, they made her the villain in a story that would become legend. "You mentioned the health department. I wonder what they'd think about a woman who runs homeless charity while actively tormenting someone in that situation." Diners stared now, earlier support evaporating as they recognized the power shift, the complete narrative reversal. Phone cameras emerged as people realized they were witnessing something viral by midnight. "You mentioned knowing the owner." David's smile was knife-sharp. "Well, now you've met two of them." Thomas looked around his restaurant, elegant decor he'd personally selected, staff he'd trained. The vision he brought to life now felt foreign, like photographs of someone else's life. "I built this place," he said softly, voice carrying unexpected strength. "I chose every piece of furniture, hired the original staff, designed every menu detail." His gaze found Victoria. "I built it as a place where people could come together, where food could bridge differences, where everyone would be welcome." The words hung like hashtags. She sneered at the man in torn clothes, but then something happened no one expected. The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across Le Bernardine's mahogany walls as Victoria Ashworth adjusted her pearl necklace, surveying what she considered her domain. The soft jazz couldn't mask her sharp intake of breath when he walked in. "Excuse me." Her voice cut through the refined atmosphere like shattered glass. "What is that doing here?" The man wore clothes that had seen better decades, threadbare coat, patched by trembling hands, shoes worn thin by countless miles. His graying beard was untrimmed, shoulders curved by invisible weight. But his eyes held something that made Victoria's skin crawl with unease. "Ma'am, please," whispered Jessica, the young hostess. "I'm sure we can." "No." Victoria's diamond bracelet caught the light as she pointed accusingly. "I didn't pay $300 to share the air with street trash." The words spread like poison through the silence. Other diners turned, curiosity piqued by the drama unfolding in their sanctuary. Victoria basked in their attention. This was her moment to remind everyone of society's natural order. But the man didn't flinch. He stood there, weathered hands clasped, watching her with eyes that seemed to see through her carefully constructed facade. "Victoria, darling," Senator Blackwood placed a restraining hand on her wrist. "Perhaps." "Don't perhaps me, Richard." She shook him off, voice rising. "This is what's wrong with society. When people like this think they belong in civilized establishments." Her gaze swept the restaurant, ensuring every patron absorbed her words. "I demand you remove this vagrant immediately, or I'll call the health department and every contact in the mayor's office." She turned to the crowd, smile sharp as a blade. "Some know who I am, Victoria Ashworth, chairwoman of the Metropolitan Charity Foundation. I've donated millions to help the homeless, but there's a proper place for charity." The irony dripped like venom, speaking of charity while practicing cruelty, helping the homeless while denying one man dignity. "Ma'am," Marcus Rodriguez, the head waiter, emerged from behind the partition, face barely concealing alarm. He'd recognized the man instantly, blood turning to ice. Victoria rose like a queen addressing subjects. "I want this person escorted out immediately. The sight of him is ruining everyone's appetite." Some diners nodded agreement while others looked away uncomfortably. "The smell alone is revolting. How did security let him in?" Marcus exchanged worried glances with Jessica, both recognizing dangerous territory. The man remained silent, his presence somehow growing more commanding with each cruel word. "I'll call the police," Victoria announced, pulling out her phone theatrically. "Trespassing, disturbing the peace, I'm sure we can find charges that stick. One call from me, and this vagrant spends tonight in jail where he belongs." The temperature seemed to drop. Even the jazz felt muted as the air held its breath. Victoria basked in the power, unaware she was about to cross a line of no return. Then something extraordinary happened. The man finally spoke. "I'm sorry for the disturbance," he said quietly, his voice carrying refinement that stopped Victoria mid-gesture. Each syllable was perfectly shaped by education and grace that seemed at odds with his appearance. Victoria's eyes narrowed. This wasn't how vagrants were supposed to sound. They mumbled, stammered, confirmed her assumptions about society's order. But this man spoke like someone who belonged here. "How charming," she recovered, tone dripping sarcasm. "Street theater. Next you'll tell us you're actually a millionaire in disguise." Her brittle laughter was designed to cut. "The performance is convincing, but we're not buying tickets." Jessica's face had gone pale. She was staring with growing recognition, pieces clicking into place. 3 years at Le Bernardin, memorizing faces and names. She'd seen his photograph before, but where? "Ma'am," Jessica interrupted trembling, "perhaps we should." "Perhaps you should mind your business and do your job," Victoria snapped. "Or find a new job. I know this restaurant's owner personally." The threat hung like smoke. Jessica flushed but bit her tongue. Her mother's medical bills depended on this job. But something was screaming that Victoria was making a terrible mistake. Marcus stepped forward, composure cracking. "Mrs. Ashworth, if I could make excuses for this farce." Victoria's voice reached theatrical levels. "Either remove this person immediately, or I'll have serious words with management about declining standards." The man absorbed it all with infinite patience, as if he'd weathered worse storms. His silence enraged her more, and she stepped closer, voice dropping to venomous whisper. "Do you understand? You don't belong here. You never have, never will. This world isn't for people like you. Shuffle back to whatever alley you crawled from and leave civilized society alone." The words were designed to destroy, to strip away dignity. Victoria had perfected this technique over decades, knowing exactly where to strike for maximum damage. She watched his face, waiting for her cruelty to break his composure. Instead, something shifted in his expression. Not anger or shame, but something deeper that made Marcus's hand tremble as he reached for his phone, made Jessica's breath catch as the final puzzle piece clicked. "Mrs. Ashworth," Jessica whispered barely audibly, "I think you should know." "I think you should know your place," Victoria snarled, whirling with bottomless rage. "This doesn't concern you." But Jessica's eyes were wide with horror. She remembered the photograph in the employee break room, next to schedules and safety regulations. A man in better times, tailored suit, cutting a ribbon with golden scissors. The man who owned Le Bernardin. The man Victoria Ashworth was currently destroying with her words. Marcus felt his phone buzzing, a text that would change everything. His hands shook reading, "Is he there? The boss said he might come tonight. Don't let anyone hurt him." From the restaurant manager, who'd received a call from someone whose authority was absolute, the man's son, checking on his father's well-being. Victoria's voice filled the restaurant with venom. "Look at him. Planning to steal silverware or beg for scraps. This is what happens when society loses its moral compass." She addressed the diners again, voice carrying practiced authority. "We work hard, follow rules, contribute to society. Then people like this think they can take what they haven't earned." The cruel irony wasn't lost on Marcus. Victoria lecturing about hard work while having inherited her wealth, tormenting a man who'd built an empire and lost it to tragedy. The man absorbed Victoria's cruelty with dignity that made Marcus's chest ache. How many had walked past him on streets, never knowing they were ignoring someone who'd once employed hundreds, fed thousands, given more to charity than most earned in lifetimes. "Security!" Victoria called suddenly, voice echoing off elegant walls. "I demand this vagrant be removed and the police called." Her words were cut off by the soft chime of the front door. A figure stepped into the warm light, and Marcus felt his blood freeze recognizing the face from business magazines. David Chun, the city's most prominent restaurateur, strode into Le Bernardin with quiet confidence, because he owned it. Marcus had seen him twice during formal inspections, but tonight his composed expression was dark with something that made the waiter step back. "Mr. Chun," Marcus whispered, lost in Victoria's continued tirade. "Absolutely disgraceful that paying customers should endure this." "Excuse me." David Chen's soft voice carried absolute authority. The restaurant fell silent as if someone had thrown a switch, sudden quiet making the jazz thunderously loud. Victoria turned, face lighting with triumphant satisfaction. Finally, authority had arrived to restore order. "Thank you," she began, voice dripping with relief. "I was beginning to think." She stopped mid-sentence, seeing David Chen's expression. Something didn't match her expectations, made her stomach clench with first whispers of unease. "I was beginning to think no one would address this situation," she continued carefully. David's gaze swept the restaurant. Nervous staff, uncomfortable diners, the man at the center with weathered clothes and patient dignity. When his eyes settled on Victoria, they held coldness that made her silk dress feel inadequate. "And what situation would that be, Mrs. Ashworth?" His use of her name sent pleasure through her. Of course he knew who she was. But something about his tone felt wrong, dangerous. "Well, obviously," she gestured dramatically, "this person has gotten past security and is disturbing guests. I've been trying to get staff to handle it, but they seem reluctant." David nodded slowly, expression unreadable. "How exactly has this man disturbed you?" Victoria's confidence surged back. "Just look at him. The smell, the appearance, the complete inappropriateness. I've been a loyal customer for years, never subjected to such assault on basic decency." She was warming to her theme, voice rising with passion. "I pay good money for this atmosphere of refinement. I shouldn't share that with someone who clearly belongs on the street." David listened to every cruel syllable, face growing darker. Behind him, staff members emerged from kitchen and service areas, faces pale with growing understanding. "Go on," Chen said quietly. "I mean really," Victoria continued, encouraged, "what message does this send? That anyone can walk in regardless of obvious unsuitability? Standards exist for a reason, Mr. Chun. Without them, we're no better than animals." Deafening silence followed. David stood perfectly still for an eternity, gaze moving slowly from Victoria to the man at her fury's center. When he finally spoke, his voice was so soft everyone strained to hear. "Thomas," he said, and the single word fell into silence like a stone into still water. The man in threadbare coat raised his head, and for the first time that evening, his eyes met someone who saw him, really saw him, for who he was. "Hello, David," Thomas replied, voice carrying decades of friendship and understanding. "I'm sorry for the disturbance. I didn't mean for things to get so complicated." Victoria's mouth fell open as she watched the exchange, mind struggling to process the familiarity, respect, even affection between them. "Thomas Chun," David said, voice carrying to every corner, "is my brother." The words hit Victoria like physical blows. Her face went white, then red, then white again as implications crashed over her in waves. Thomas Chun, the name rang bells in business articles, society pages, charity galas where she'd seen him honored. "He built the restaurant empire that includes this establishment," David continued, voice strengthening. "He employed over 3,000 people across 15 restaurants. He donated millions to homeless shelters, food banks, addiction recovery programs." His gaze never left Victoria's stricken face. "He lost everything when his wife and daughter were killed by a drunk driver 3 years ago." Absolute silence except for Victoria's shallow breathing. Jessica felt tears stinging as pieces fell into place. The tragedy that destroyed a good man, grief that drove him to streets, addiction that followed as he escaped unbearable pain. For the past year, David's voice grew dangerously quiet. Thomas has been living on the streets, struggling with alcoholism and depression while trying to find his way back. "I've been searching, trying to get him help, praying someone would show kindness that might remind him life is worth living." Victoria's legs felt weak. The room spun as she realized the magnitude of her mistake, the depth of her cruelty, the impossibility of taking back words thrown like daggers at a man already dying from invisible wounds. "Instead," David continued, voice cutting glass, "he walked into one of his own restaurants and was subjected to the most vicious, heartless display of human cruelty I've ever witnessed." Thomas stepped forward, gentle hand on his brother's arm. "David, please. It's not worth." "It's worth everything," David said fiercely. "You are worth everything." The love in his voice, fierce protectiveness, raw pain of watching his brother suffer, it pressed against Victoria's chest, making breathing impossible. Senator Blackwood had gone pale as paper, recognizing the political disaster unfolding before his eyes. His dinner companion, his ally in numerous charity boards and political causes, had just publicly destroyed a man whose story would be front-page news by morning. "Mrs. Ashworth," David Chen's voice cut through her panic like a blade. You mentioned calling the police. Please, don't let me stop you. I'm sure they'd be very interested to hear how you publicly humiliated a man whose only crime was trying to find his way back to the world he helped build. Victoria's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, her usual arsenal of words completely depleted. For the first time in her life, her wealth, her connections, her social position meant nothing. Worse than nothing, they made her the villain in a story that would be told and retold until it became legend. You mentioned the health department, David continued relentlessly. I wonder what they'd think about a woman who claims to run a charity for the homeless while actively tormenting someone in that exact situation? The other diners were staring now, their earlier support for Victoria evaporating as they recognized the shift in power, the complete reversal of the narrative they'd thought they understood. Phone cameras were emerging from purses and pockets as people realized they were witnessing something that would be viral by midnight. You mentioned knowing the owner. David's smile was sharp as a knife. Well, now you've met two of them. Thomas looked around the restaurant, his restaurant, seeing it through new eyes. The elegant decor he'd personally selected, the staff he'd trained, the vision he brought to life now felt foreign to him, like looking at photographs of someone else's life. I built this place, he said softly, his voice carrying a strength that surprised everyone, including himself. I chose every piece of furniture, hired every member of the original staff, designed every detail of the menu. His gaze found Victoria, and she shrank back from the quiet dignity in his eyes. I built it to be a place where people could come together, where food could bridge differences, where everyone would be welcome. The words hung in the air like an indictment, each one a stark contrast to the cruelty Victoria had displayed. Jessica was crying openly now, and even Marcus had to wipe his eyes with his sleeve. I lost my way for a while, Thomas continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. I lost everything that mattered to me, and I couldn't find a reason to keep fighting. But I never forgot what this place was supposed to represent. He looked around at the faces staring at him, some with pity, some with recognition, some with a dawning understanding of what they'd just witnessed. I came here tonight because I was ready, he said simply. Ready to remember who I used to be. Ready to try again. His eyes found Victoria's face. Your words hurt, Mrs. Ashworth. They hurt because they reminded me of how I've been thinking about myself for the past 3 years. Victoria felt something breaking inside her chest, some fundamental part of her worldview cracking under the weight of Thomas's quiet dignity. But they also reminded me of something else, Thomas continued. They reminded me that cruelty is a choice. Kindness is a choice. And the person I used to be, the person I want to be again, would never make the choice you made tonight. David stepped beside his brother, his hand on Thomas's shoulder, both of them presenting a united front that spoke of years of shared history and unbreakable bonds. Mrs. Ashworth, David said, his voice now carrying the weight of final judgment, you are no longer welcome in any of our establishments. Your reservation is cancelled, your membership to our private dining club is revoked, and I'll be contacting every restaurant owner in the city to share your behavior tonight. The words fell like stones into still water, sending ripples of consequence outward in all directions. Victoria's social world, built on restaurant reservations, charity galas, and exclusive events, began to crumble around her in real time. You wanted to know what kind of establishment we're running? David's smile was sharp as broken glass. We're running the kind of establishment that believes human dignity is non-negotiable. The kind that chooses compassion over cruelty. The kind that would rather lose 1,000 customers than lose our souls. Senator Blackwood stood up abruptly, recognizing the political catastrophe unfolding. His association with Victoria, his presence at this moment, his silence during her tirade, it would all be scrutinized, analyzed, weaponized by his opponents. He threw his napkin on the table and walked toward the exit without a backward glance, leaving Victoria alone to face the consequences of her actions. Richard, she called after him, her voice cracking with desperation. But he didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge her existence. The door closed behind him with finality, cutting off another avenue of escape. Victoria stood alone in the center of the restaurant, surrounded by faces that no longer held sympathy or support. The other diners who had nodded in agreement with her earlier words were now looking away, distancing themselves from the radioactive fallout of her cruelty. I didn't know, she whispered, the words barely audible. I didn't know who he was. Thomas stepped forward, his weathered face filled with something that might have been compassion. That's exactly the problem, Mrs. Ashworth. You didn't know, but you decided anyway. You saw someone who looked different, who seemed vulnerable, and you chose to attack. His words were gentle but devastating in their accuracy. You didn't need to know who I was to treat me with basic human decency. You chose not to because you thought there would be no consequences. The truth of his words hit Victoria like physical blows. She had attacked him precisely because she thought he was powerless, because she believed her position protected her from accountability. The cruelty had been the point, a public demonstration of her superiority, her untouchability. My wife used to volunteer at the homeless shelter, Thomas continued, his voice taking on a distant quality as he remembered. She'd come home and tell me stories about the people she met, their histories, their struggles, their dreams. She always said that the only difference between them and us was luck and circumstances. Victoria felt tears starting to burn behind her eyes as she began to understand the full weight of what she'd done. She hadn't just attacked a stranger, she'd attacked a man who was already carrying the heaviest possible burden, who had lost everything that mattered to him, who was struggling to find reasons to keep living. She was right, Thomas said simply. I learned that the hard way. The silence that followed was broken by the soft sound of Jessica approaching. She moved carefully, as if afraid of disturbing something precious and fragile. Mr. Chun, she said softly, I recognized you from your picture in the break room. I wanted to say, I'm sorry. For what happened tonight, and for everything you've been through. Thomas looked at the young woman who had shown him more kindness in 5 minutes than he'd received in months on the streets. Thank you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. That means more than you know. Your table is ready whenever you are, Jessica continued, her eyes still bright with tears. I had the kitchen prepare your old favorite, the one from the original menu you designed. The gesture was small but profound, a recognition of who he had been and who he could be again. Thomas felt something stirring in his chest that he'd thought was dead forever, hope. Victoria watched this exchange with growing horror, recognizing the grace and dignity being shown to the man she'd tried to destroy. Every kindness extended to Thomas felt like a judgment on her own behavior, a stark contrast that illuminated the darkness of her actions. Mrs. Ashworth, David's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts, you have a choice to make. She looked up, startled by the unexpected lifeline in his tone. You can leave here tonight and continue being the person who would torture someone for the crime of looking different, he continued. You can go home to your mansion and your charity boards and convince yourself that you're somehow the victim in this story. Victoria felt herself holding her breath, waiting for the alternative. Or, David's voice softened slightly, you can use this moment to become someone different. Someone better. Someone who would never inflict this kind of pain on another human being. The choice hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility and consequence. Victoria looked around the restaurant, at the staff members whose respect she'd lost, at the diners who would remember this night forever, at the man whose dignity had remained intact despite her best efforts to destroy it. For the first time in her life, Victoria Ashworth was faced with a mirror that showed her exactly who she was, and she didn't like what she saw. I'm sorry, she whispered, the words feeling foreign in her mouth. I'm so sorry. Thomas studied her face, looking for sincerity beneath the social conditioning and learned cruelty. What he saw there was the beginning of something, not redemption, not yet, but perhaps the recognition that redemption was necessary. I was angry, Victoria continued, her voice growing stronger as she found the courage to speak the truth. I was angry about things that had nothing to do with you, and I took it out on you because I thought I could. Because I thought you couldn't fight back. The admission hung in the air like smoke, dissipating the last of Victoria's pretenses and leaving only the raw honesty of someone facing their worst self. I've spent my whole life using my money and position to make other people smaller so I could feel bigger, she continued, each word seeming to cost her something precious. I've never stopped to think about the damage I was doing, because I never had to see the consequences. Thomas nodded slowly, recognizing the courage it took for her to speak these truths. What happens now? He asked quietly. Victoria looked around the restaurant one more time, seeing it through different eyes, not as her domain to control, but as someone else's dream made manifest. She thought about her charity work, her donations, her carefully cultivated reputation as a philanthropist, and realized how hollow it all was when measured against the cruelty she was capable of inflicting. I don't know, she said honestly. I don't know how to be different. I don't know how to undo 30 years of being this. She gestured to herself with something approaching disgust. It starts with a choice, Thomas said simply. Every day, every interaction, every moment when you have the power to build someone up or tear them down. It starts with choosing differently. Victoria nodded, tears streaming down her face now, her carefully applied makeup running in dark streaks down her cheeks. "I'll try," she whispered. "I'll try to be better." She looked at David, seeing something in his expression that might have been cautious hope. "I know I can't undo what I did tonight. I know saying sorry doesn't fix the damage. But if you'll let me, if there's a way, I'd like to help." David studied her face for a long moment, weighing sincerity against skepticism, hope against experience. "Help how?" "However you'll let me," Victoria said simply. "Your brother mentioned addiction recovery programs, homeless shelters. I have resources, connections, influence. Instead of using them to hurt people, maybe I could use them to help." Thomas looked at his brother, seeing the same cautious optimism reflected in David's eyes. They had both learned the hard way that people could change, that rock bottom could be either the end of the story or the foundation for something new. "Real help," David said carefully, "means more than writing checks. It means showing up, getting your hands dirty, treating people with dignity even when no one's watching." "I understand," Victoria said, and for the first time in her life, she thought she actually did. The restaurant around them began to return to its normal rhythm, conversations resuming in hushed tones as the drama of the evening settled into memory. But for the people at the center of the storm, everything had changed irrevocably. Thomas looked around his restaurant one more time, seeing it not as a monument to what he'd lost, but as a reminder of what he could build again. The elegant dining room, the carefully trained staff, the vision of bringing people together through food, it was all still there, waiting for him to reclaim it. "Jessica," he called to the young hostess, who hurried over with eager attention. "Yes, Mr. Chun?" "Would you please show me to my table?" he asked, his voice carrying the first notes of the authority and confidence he'd once possessed. "I believe I have some catching up to do." As Jessica led Thomas through the restaurant he designed, David watched his brother's shoulders straighten incrementally with each step. The journey back from the brink would be long and difficult, but tonight had proven that it was possible. Victoria stood alone for a moment longer, feeling the weight of every choice that had led her to this moment. Tomorrow, she would wake up in her mansion and face a world that knew exactly who she was. The story of her cruelty would spread through social media and society pages, through charity boards and country clubs, through every corner of the small world she'd spent her life trying to dominate. She could retreat, surround herself with lawyers and publicists and damage control specialists. She could craft explanations and excuses, blame stress or misunderstandings or anything except her own choices. She could wait for the scandal to fade and try to return to the life she'd always known. Or she could do something harder. She could face the music, accept the consequences, and use this moment as the catalyst for becoming someone worth being. As she walked toward the restaurant's exit, Victoria made her choice. She pulled out her phone, not to call lawyers or publicists, but to find the number for the homeless shelter where Thomas's wife had volunteered. Tomorrow morning, she would show up not as a wealthy patron dropping off a check, but as someone ready to roll up her sleeves and do the work. It wouldn't be enough to repair the damage she'd done, wouldn't instantly transform her into a good person. But it would be a start. Behind her, Thomas Chun sat at a table in the restaurant he'd built, ordering from the menu he designed, surrounded by staff members who remembered when he'd known all their names and asked about their families. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges and setbacks and the daily struggle of rebuilding a life from ashes. But for the first time in 3 years, he wasn't walking that road alone. The jazz music continued to play softly in the background, the crystal chandelier continued to cast dancing shadows on the mahogany walls, and Le Bernardin continued to serve its purpose, bringing people together, one meal at a time. Some lessons were learned the hard way, but they were learned nonetheless. In the end, that night became a story that would be told and retold, not because of the cruelty it contained, but because of the humanity it revealed. It became a reminder that we are all one tragedy, one bad break, one moment of devastating loss away from needing the kindness of strangers. And that kindness, when we choose to offer it, has the power to save us all.